Today I'm going to walk you through my creative process for creating this wooden pebble. So I actually created a full music version of this piece that I will link below if you're interested in that. In this video, I am just going to be explaining my process as I was creating this piece. So this red paint I actually made myself. It's Liquitex red, but I added an iridescent medium to it to kind of make it more of a metallic paint. I have not found a really good red metallic paint that I like, so I really like the idea of making my own, and it worked out really well. The gold is Liquitex that I thinned down with some pouring medium, and the purple is Arteza, which is also a thicker paint that I thinned down with pouring medium. I really like Arteza's metallic paint. I am not sponsored, just a paint that I really like to use. It doesn't have that stringy effect craft bottle metallic paints have, so it's just a lot easier to handle. So I really enjoy just the consistency of it, but I do have to thin it down with pouring medium. Here I just wanted to build out the center some so I could do some walking the dots and kind of build out some petals. I did use a stencil to put the guidelines on. It just makes it a little bit easier, less thinking involved if you can just use the guidelines instead of visualizing it. And here I am just doing a technique called walking the dots. So I just dip my tool into the paint, and as I work my way around, each dot gets naturally smaller and smaller, creating this really cool effect. It's a technique I use a lot with my work, but when I'm using metallics, I tend to not use it as much because of just like the texture of the paint. It does make it a little bit harder when you get to some of the other colors. So I tend to do a lot more swipes, which is what I will end up doing on this piece. So as I'm working my way around, I realize that this purple is showing up really dark on the stone. So if I were to do like a lot of walking the dots, you're not really going to see a lot of that detail. It's going to get lost. So I decided to do a swipe instead, and it just makes it where you can really see that purple and you don't really lose it with the black of the stone. It's a little trick I use sometimes if a color is not showing up really well, is I'll just use it more for bigger dots or swipes, and it allows that color to still be enjoyed without it just blending into the stone completely. Unless that's a look you're going for, you can do that too, which will create a lot of depth if you want it to kind of like just disappear into the stone. So that's something to play around with as well. Then I just wanted to kind of like outline the petal more by just adding more walking the dots in the gold, just really defining where that petal ends. I always take my time walking the dots. I really pay attention to my spacing, how much space I have between each petal, and like the size of the dots on each side. Just try to keep everything nice and symmetrical as possible. I then decided that I really wanted to kind of define this area a little bit more. So I decided to do some red swipes, just really separating that section out a little bit. When I'm doing these swipes with thicker paint, I usually just load up a dot with a lot of paint like I'm doing here. And then I would just take a needle to just kind of slide that paint into the spot that I want. This technique also allows you to make the swipes in a lot of different shapes and styles. Just really taking my time. This is sped up, and I kind of slowed it down a little bit for you here. So you kind of just see that process where I just slowly just kind of manipulate that paint to get it into the spot that I would like it to be. I tend to not let my swipes touch. It's just a personal preference. But if they do, that's okay. I usually fix it because that's just how I am. But you can totally leave it. It's totally fine. That's more of a me thing. So anyways, after I did this little section, I just kind of touched up any swipes that I needed to. And here I was having a hard time deciding what exactly I wanted to do next. So I did decide to do like a purple swipe going down the center and just kind of seeing the space that left me. And I really didn't have much of a plan at this point. I was just kind of like, well, I like the way this looks. I'm just going to keep doing it, going all the way around, and then I'm just going to have to try to figure out what exactly I want to do next. So in the end, I still hadn't made a decision at this point, so I decided that I was going to put a big purple dot on top of these swipes, and hopefully the rest would come to me as I was working my way with this. I did really like the way I did that first petal with just going from like the gold, purple, gold. So I decided to do kind of the same thing, but just alternating the colors. Since now I have a purple dot, I'll just go from the gold to the red to the gold. Again, I'm doing just a lot of walking the dots, just really taking my time. I really just enjoy the way this ends up looking with all the little tiny dots just kind of going around, just really defining that outer border. And doing a lighter color against that purple really helps define that dot, since it does kind of blend in into the background. So having that lighter gold surrounding it really helps define where that dot is, which kind of helps just bring the whole piece together. Next, I did decide to go ahead and do some red sections, and I went back and forth if I wanted to walk the dots or if I was going to do a swipe. In the end, I decided to just kind of stick with the same pattern that I did on the first row, and I decided to just do the red swipes. I thought it would be like a really neat idea to just kind of play around with. Even though the red would show up really well with walking the dots, I just kind of liked the pattern that I had created in the first section and decided just to kind of repeat it and go with it and see how this would end up looking. Here, my paint is still pretty thick, and I do load these up with some extra paint. And I am using a larger tool to make my swipes instead of the needle, just to get a thicker swipe going around, because I do have a lot more space. I then decided to go ahead and add purple back into this petal, since I do have a lot of extra space on this outside edge. In order to get those dots just right, I did have to go in and kind of use a needle to kind of swirl it around a little bit, just to kind of smooth them out. And here you can just see how thick this paint is. So I'm just loading it up with a lot of paint, because these are really big, thick swipes. I'm using a lot larger tool, so I'm going to need a lot more paint, but I still wanted the ends to get really thin. So I used a couple of different tools here, and in the end, I still ended up using the needle to kind of just work my way around that swipe. On the sides, I wanted to do these big golden dots, and my paint is really thick here, and you can see like I'm kind of like swirling the tool around, and what I'm doing there is I'm getting rid of the little peak in the middle of the dot. So here I just take my tool away, and you can see how it just left a little peak there, but when I take it, kind of swirl it, it kind of just helps get rid of that point without me having to go in with a needle. It just kind of saves me a little bit of time, and it's super fun to just kind of do this little swirling motion. I also pull my tool away once I get the paint to the top of the dot, because gravity is going to take its effect and help it settle back down towards the middle. So I just kind of let gravity work with me, and it ends up working out pretty well. Then I continue the pattern of walking the gold dots around the purple swipe to once again help define that swipe. You can see how that purple swipe starts to blend into the black, where you can't really see where it ends very well, but adding these gold dots, working my way around, really just kind of helps define that a lot better. Also, you'll notice that I am using like several different tools to make my way all the way around, just making sure that those dots continually get a little bit smaller. So here I'm using the larger end of this tool, and I'll do a couple of dots doing that same swirl technique. And then once I start working my way around, I will switch there to the smaller end of the nail dotting tool, and I'll still do a couple of dots where I get some more paint, and then I will just slowly just work my way around, and that ends up giving me like a really nice effect for these longer sections of walking the dots. Next, I finally made a decision on what I wanted to do with that little space that I had left, and I decided to just do another row of smaller red swipes, which I really did enjoy and loved doing, and I thought that that was just a really good choice for that area. And then I was left with this weird space between these two petals, trying to decide what I wanted to do here. I tried a couple different things, and in the end, I really like the look of doing these big long red swipes. So with this, I really had to pay attention to my spacing. I was just kind of making them the size that I needed to fill in the space, and making sure that they didn't touch the red on the other side, so that way I can kind of keep that area defined. I really had to take my time in this section and really pay attention to the amount of space I had. And you can see that I'm constantly going from different tools, just depending on how much space I have to work with. So this part did take a little bit, plus the paint's wet, so I have to be really careful where I touch the stone. But in the end, I ended up really liking the way that this turned out. I did notice though that there ended up being like a lot of red in that one section, and you're kind of starting to lose some of that definition there. So I decided to go in and I changed those red dots to purple. And that really helped kind of define that area a little bit better, and I ended up liking that more. Then I brought some bigger purple dots to the side and then decided to accent those again with the gold. I ended up doing a couple of rounds of this. It took me a little bit to figure out how I wanted to finish this off, but I really just loved the gold dots around the purple, so that's kind of what I went with. This was another period where I really had to just take my time, just the way I'm holding the stone, and to make sure that I didn't touch any of those wet dots. Even though it's just a small little detail, it did end up taking a little bit of time to get these little dots just right. And then I went in with some top dots. So I just took my paint and just added a little bit of white to it to make a little bit of a lighter shade. For the purple, I had a different color purple that I really enjoy using on top of the original purple. So I just kind of went with that. And then I did decide to go in and do even lighter top dots once those had dried. And to do those, I just ended up going in and just adding white to both of those last two shades. And that created a really nice color for me to go in and just place these final little detail dots. And after that, I just did a few minor touch-ups and removed the guidelines with just a damp Q-tip, and then the piece was ready to go. If you liked this type of tutorial, please let me know in the comments. Just me talking about my creative process. Hopefully that helps you to understand some of the choices and decisions I make when creating my art to help you come up with your own designs. And here is the finished piece.